1998's Thief, The Dark Project, was one of the first steps into a fully realized immersive sim, and with the help of Metal Gear Solid, started stealth games as a genre. That's not to say stealth games didn't exist before then, but these two made them something that was a recognized genre. After Thief hit the scene, we got a ton of games getting in on that sneak-em-up gravy train. The Thief series eventually ran its course with a trilogy of games featuring Thief 2, The Metal Age, and Thief, Deadly Shadows later on in the mid-2000s under a different developer. The big draw with Thief was that it was an all-stealth game and could be done without a single fight or even having anyone know that you were there. There was no waves of guards to fight, no real boss battles, and certain exploits notwithstanding, Garrett is not exactly a master swordsman. If anything, a typical guard can easily thrash him within an inch of his life if he's not careful. Even when the producers begged Looking Glass to allow you to just up and kill the guards in a fight, they didn't budge. You have to master the stealth system and lurking in the darkness in order to get anywhere in Thief. Don't worry though, because a game where you play as a master thief is obviously going to be built around the stealth system and lurking in the darkness. All sorts of things help you to sneak around. How hard the floor is, the amount of light in a room, if there are any sort of noises or other distractions keeping the guards occupied. As long as you're taking it sneaky and slow, you'll be fine. Thief had a pretty spectacular run despite flipping between developers from Looking Glass to Ion Storm, and once the third game ran its course, it looked like we were all done with the Thief Trilogy. However, fast forward about 8 years into the future, and the immersive sim darling Arcane Studios released Dishonored in 2012. Not to be outdone, Eidos, the original publisher of the Thief franchise, released their own successor to Thief 2 years later in 2014. It seemed that not only was the Thief franchise back, but there was some serious competition as to who was the worthy successor of the original trilogy. Both 2014's Thief and Dishonored are very similar when you strip them down to their core mechanics. They're both emulating the same game, so it makes sense. Stealth and exploration are king in both games, and both of those actions are heavily rewarded with more loot and sometimes an overt bonus to your stats at the end of a level. Everything is designed to have all sorts of opportunities to find alternate paths or sneak right under the noses of patrolling guards. You do have the option to take out the guards or overtly kill them, but that is almost always frowned upon during the course of the game. Both games also have what I've decided to call Spooky Vision. Spooky Vision is a toggleable ability that puts the world into faded colors and starts highlighting objects of importance or enemies, similar to what we first saw in the Batman Arkham series, Detective Vision sort of thing. You highlight enemies, you see things that you need to be picked up, potential alternative paths. I don't know if this was purely coincidental or if one decided to copy the other after the first one came out, but it's uncanny how both features work almost exactly the same between the two games, save for in Dishonored you have to upgrade your Spooky Vision in order to see useful items. And it couldn't be a Thief successor without being able to steal everything that isn't bolted to the floor. Steal coins somebody left on their desk. Steal their jewelry. Steal rare paintings. Never mind where you're carrying all of this stuff. Steal the silverware. Steal everything in the medicine cabinet. Empty out that safe. It's the homeowner's fault that they left their valuables in a safe being protected by the fantasy 19th century equivalent of mall cops. Both games are going to satisfy your need to swipe every last bit of loot you can possibly get your hands on. Now, as for what makes each game unique, we'll start with Dishonored since it was released first. Dishonored was developed by Arcane Studios under the wing of Bethesda. In Dishonored, you play as royal bodyguard and possible Imperial boy toy Corvo Attano, who has returned from a failed relief mission and is home just long enough to play a game of hide-and-seek with heiress Emily before the Empress herself is murdered right in front of him and he's taking the fall for it. Corvo eventually gets away with the help of some loyalists to the Empire who want to help him clear his name and save Emily. Something of note here is that Dishonored features a star-studded cast including the likes of Lena Headey, Chloe Grace Moretz, Carrie Fisher, John Slattery, April Stewart, Billy Lush, and a whole lot of other people I only really know from one or two things. Also, all the random lowlifes in the city are voiced by the same guy who does Bertram Tung from VTMB, and he uses the same voice, which makes you think, hey, what's Tung doing here? Every time I hear him. Dishonored has all the trappings of a Thief-esque stealth game, save for one major exception. Corvo is definitely much more of an assassin than he is a sneak thief. Corvo's primary weapon is a sword, and he's renowned for his combat expertise, with guards having conversations about how he would go 4-1 during his practice sparring sessions like it was no big deal. Corvo is very good at killing people, and the game makes sure you know that. And while the game does try to push you to save people and will try and punish you for massacring everyone in a level, combat builds are more than viable, and there are lots of tools made specifically for killing people as opposed to just incapacitating or avoiding them. Guns are very rarely used for stealth or non-lethal purposes, and Corvo gets abilities related to disposing of bodies or even obliterating them on death in order to make sure that no one finds his handiwork. If you kill too many people, there will be more bodies that will make the plague going through the island even worse, and more guards will be on edge when you take on subsequent missions because they keep hearing about how guys on the morning shift are coming in to discover a pile of limbs that was once third shift. If you get too murder happy, some of your allies will even up and betray you in the name of the greater good, and you'll get a bad ending. This won't be a problem though if you went full on murder mode and you have all the rune upgrades. Whether you choose to let people live or not, there's a multitude of ways that you can do any particular thing on your mission. There is always a means to spare your target's life, or massacre everyone in the building through tricks, or you can just sleep by and make sure that no one knows you are even there save for your target. There's all sorts of secret pathways up high and down low, so you can get around the security in place and creep up right behind them and give them a nice little hug. There's also bonus objectives that you can stumble upon mid-mission while exploring, which can provide nice bonuses if done right. Help this lady escape hordes of hungry rats before they eat her. Consort with the local organized crime boss. End a man's life in front of all of his friends because your bro was too much of a coward to challenge him to a duel himself. Help a little old lady with her errands by poisoning the only medicine supply that all the poor people can afford. Fun times. Dishonored's biggest departure from the original Thief games, and also its most interesting gameplay feature, is that you have straight up superpowers. Some guy who lives in the Shadow Realm who calls himself the Outsider decides it'd be cool to give a guy that was already a veritable killing machine otherworldly abilities. The stuff you get in Dishonored seems like every ability is based on answering the question, remember how doing blank in the Thief games was annoying and tedious? Well, what if we introduced blank superpower to let the player entirely circumvent that? Is there a really long stretch of hallway and you need to get across it and you have a high chance of being seen, or perhaps there's a ledge just out of reach? Well, now you can teleport your way over there with blink. Do guards keep discovering the bodies of their co-workers, unconscious or otherwise? Now you can summon hordes of rats to eat them up, or get the power to murder them so hard they turn into dust upon death. Don't want to maneuver through an area with lots of guards and obstacles in it in order to get through an objective? Mindjack a rat or even a human being to get over there with no one being the wiser. Dishonored powers don't detract from the game, however, because the levels are built around the assumption that you're going to use them everywhere. Certain powers were taken out of the game for being too exploitable, and all the maps were built way out in order to accommodate for blink spam. There's a good number of little challenges that you might try and do within levels based on having certain powers at certain points in the game. Dishonored is definitely a game for those with fond memories of the Thief franchise, however who don't want to relive the more tedious parts of the game. 2 years after the release of Dishonored, Eidos Montreal released their own successor to the Thief Trilogy in Thief 2014. This was first announced in 2009 as Thief 4, but someone at Eidos came to their senses and realized such a name was an affront to all sensibility and changed it to just Thief. Thief went through a good bit of reworking to get it where they wanted it to be. Sort of. Eidos was riding high on the success of reviving the Deus Ex franchise and felt ready to show those punks at Arcane who owned the franchise both figuratively and literally. Thief's protagonist, Garrett, is almost a perfect foil to Corvo Attano. Garrett sucks in a fight and can barely fend off a couple guards with his life intact. If Garrett wants to take out a guard or three, he's going to have to sneak around and get the drop on them one by one and make sure that none of the guards see him taking out any of their co-workers. Where Garrett excels compared to Corvo is his ability to steal things. Nothing is safe from Garrett's bottomless pockets once he's in a room. Garrett can check every drawer, every safe, every secret compartment. He'll steal everything that isn't bolted down and then some. Most of Garrett's tools and abilities are things that enhance his ability to steal things. Bolt cutters to disarm traps and tripwires, a razor blade so that you can steal rare paintings right out of their frames, a silent speed wrench that lets you steal stuff that's literally bolted down. Garrett definitely has a much more sneaky vibe to his actions too, which we'll get a bit more into during the head-to-head comparison. Thief also has something of an open world vibe to it, or at least a very large sprawling hub world that you have to pass through every time you go off to do a mission. There are also side jobs that you can pick up through your fence, a guy named Basso, which takes place inside of apartments and shops you'll find in the hub world. After a while it'll get on your nerves though, as you'll hear a lot of the same conversations and the same pathways get tedious after a while. I'm going to be kind of bugged about that, especially since they make a big fuss in the beginning of the game about the rooftops being the thieves' highway. However, you only really get to use them in guided segments unless you're you're going onto somebody's like balcony or something. The last things of note here are 1. Thief's difficulty settings, which the original Thief had difficulty settings that can be described as how they appear in the first level of the first game's objectives. On normal, you just gotta make your way into Lord Bafford's mansion, swipe the scepter, and you're done. On hard, you'll have a few more guards patrolling, plus you'll have to make your way out of the manor once you've grabbed the scepter, and you're going to need to steal 350 gold worth of stuff to cover your costs. By the way, don't kill any servants, that's rude. On expert, now you have to steal double that amount, and you're not allowed to kill the guards now either. They're just doing their jobs. Difficulty in the original Thief games was less about tweaking values and more about adding new challenges on top of the ones you already had initially. Thief 2014 does difficulty in a similar way, where you can choose from the beginning what modifiers you want. Do you want lethal options on the table, or are you going no kill? At higher presets, you can go non-lethal, no spooky vision, only one save at the end of each mission, and at the highest difficulty setting, if you die at any point in the game, you have to start the whole thing over. However, where things get really interesting is that you can make your own custom difficulty setting that gives you score modifiers based on what difficulty options you choose. I really wish I saw more of this in games because it's a really cool way to let players have the exact kind of experience that they want to have. One last thing about Thief is that it's sort of the sequel to Deadly Shadows while being a reboot at the same time. While it's not overt, at the end of Deadly Shadows, Garrett is now the High Keeper, or whatever his rank is, and he gets pickpocketed by a young girl in the same way that he originally pickpocketed a keeper all those years ago. And it's heavily implied that Garrett takes that girl as his student for the next master thieving keeper whatever. And in 2014's Thief, we have Aaron the Little Edgelord as Garrett's former apprentice, and by the way they talk to one another, it seems like there was some sort of thing like that. There's also your fence and primary contract broker, Basso, who shares a name with the Basso the Boxman from the first 2 Thief games. It's never overtly laid out again, but Basso in Thief 2014 references things that sound like events that happened in the first 2 Thief games, and Garrett and him seem to have a long history together in this game. There's also what might be the remains of a Hammerite temple where the Queen of Beggars has set up shop, but this could all be leftovers from when this game was Thief 4, or possibly just a series of nods to the fans of the original trilogy. Now that you've been introduced to both contenders to the Thief franchise's place, it's time to compare them and see which is the better successor to the original trilogy. We're going to compare both games in 5 different places, and whichever gets 3 out of 5 wins the title of successor. We're going to start with gameplay, as a game without fun stuff to do in it isn't really worth anyone's time unless you're really, really thirsty. We'll look at one game, then the other, and finally I'll give a verdict and an explanation. First up is Thief 2014's gameplay. Thief does one thing, and it does it very well: stealth. Thief is all about how sneaky you can be and how much loot you can get away with taking from right under the guards' noses. All of your tools and abilities are stealth related, and with my personal favorite being the swoop button. If I had my way, every game that has stealth would have the swoop button. It's something that lets you cover a small distance quickly without being seen. Some games have something like this, but it doesn't quite scratch the itch that Thief's swoop button does. Swoop button. Swoop. Dishonored also does stealth, but it does a lot more too. Thief does have some opportunities for sabotage over stealth with a mix of context and levels and stuff, but Dishonored is all about letting you mess with the security system and everything else in the level. When sneaking gets old, playing loud and murderously makes Dishonored an entirely different game, and throwing your mobility-based superpowers into the mix and things are going to get wild. My only gripe against Dishonored's gameplay is that where in Thief, getting spotted is something that you can recover from, be prepared to see a lot of the reload screen in Dishonored, because if someone so much as thinks they might have seen you, it's all over for your stealth run. This first one goes to Dishonored because while at times gameplay can be a little on the frustrating side, there's just so much more to do in Dishonored compared to Thief. While you don't get a swoop button in Dishonored, you do get a blink, which does the job well enough, but you don't get to swoop. Then there's the matter of who has the coolest toolkit. I know it's not the most important factor in the quality of a game, but it helps sell the experience of being a master burglar or assassin, and I need 5 total categories to decide a winner. Garrett's primary tool is his bow. He can do just about anything with it. Hit switches, douse torches, burn things, create a new path, and good old-fashioned shooting people with arrows among other things. Garrett also has a few specialty tools like the wire cutter, a razor, lock picks, and a grappling hook that he took off Aaron in the prologue. The grapple makes a good bonk stick too if you want to take out a guard without killing them. CTE doesn't count as murder, so it's okay. Garrett also gets his spooky vision and a host of supernatural buffs, plus a few charms he can buy off Basso or whoever that guy is in the alley. Garrett's gear is lightweight looking, but diverse enough to where there's pretty much nothing he can't steal. Corvo's gear is okay, I guess. His main thing is a collapsible sword, which won't come into play very much at all if you're playing a non-lethal route, so basically you're just Corvo the Strangler. Corvo also gets a compact crossbow for quiet takedowns that can have sleep darts and napalm darts. To round things out, you also get proxy mines, grenades, and a friggin' gun. Guns and grenades aren't exactly known for being the weapons of choice for people who are trying to remove people from an area as quietly as possible. And unlike Thief, where you're allowed to pocket one breakable or loud object to throw when you need it, in Dishonored, you have to actively be holding the item in front of you if you're going to use it, which disables you from using your powers or any other abilities while you're holding that item, which gets really annoying when you find certain things that you need to use for objectives or bonuses. I'm giving this one to Thief. The abilities given to Corvo by the Outsider are cool and all, but outside of a folding sword, which you're not going to see a lot of unless you're playing as a mass murderer, you don't get a lot of cool stuff in Dishonored. Contrast that with Thief, where you get all sorts of specialized tools, and superpowers only get you so far. When it comes to trueness to the original trilogy, Thief has it pretty easy. It's a sort of soft reboot as we established before, or maybe it's a sequel. It's vague. It does have references to previous games, but the devs said it was a reboot. Just like all the other games, stealth is king, and Garrett is awful in a fight, so don't try to take on the guards. Garrett and Thief's 2014 speciality is true to the originals in that your main objective is to steal everything. Dishonored definitely has the trappings of a Thief-like stealth game, but ultimately it's more of its own thing. You can still try to steal just about every valuable thing you find, but Corvo is definitely more of a killer than a saboteur than he is a burglar. There's plenty of sneaking around and fighting hidden paths though, and while I guess it's sort of a thing that's true to the original, because the late 90s were the golden age of save scumming in games, you will see the load game screen a lot in Dishonored. This one easily goes to 2014's Thief. It's in the same universe as the original game, and is all about sneaking and stealing things. This isn't necessarily bad for Dishonored, as it's okay to go and do your own thing, but purists should look towards 2014's Thief for their fix. Up next is story, which, I'm gonna be honest here, there's not a lot going on for either of these games. Thief has a story which seems to mainly connect the levels together and is entirely forgettable. There's a twist or two in here, but nothing to write home about. There are also attempts at world building in the levels and in the overworld, but it's mildly annoying at best and outright frustrating for reasons we'll get into in the next category. Unfortunately, for the sake of this video, Dishonored is more of the same. The overarching story is kinda lame, however, the supporting cast is much more interesting than Thief's, and the levels have their own little built-in worlds that are somewhat fun to look at. It's worth noting that both games share a lot of similar plot devices, such as a plague to explain why the streets are so empty, ruling class with ulterior motives related to that plague, a brothel level where the clientele's tastes are used against them, and at times I wondered if both games got the same writer to do their story concepts. I'm giving this one to Dishonored, even though I wish I could make it a draw, because Dishonored at least has interesting characters, but other than that, both games' stories are dull as dishwater. Finally, when it comes to polish and graphics and attention to detail, Thief 2014 stumbles pretty badly. Right out of the gate, you'll have guards spitting around like tops and clipping your walls here and there, and there's issues with voice lines looping almost perfectly at the end of recording, to the point where you'll hear the same stupid story about Polly Adler 3 times a minute, and you'll end up turning voice volume all the way down in your option menus out of sheer frustration. Also, triggerable cutscenes will restart every time you activate the trigger, so if you want to see the whole thing, you have to stay there and watch the whole thing and risk being caught. You can't get bits and pieces or like listen through proximity. I don't know why it's like this. This is all very strange considering the care and attention that Eidos put into other parts of the game. Like how almost every object has an animation with Garrett interacting with it that shows off how carefully Garrett interacts with things in order to make as little noise as possible. Or how you can maneuver Garrett's feet around broken glass on the floor to avoid making noise. This kind of stuff screams rushed development with minimal QA testing at the end. Dishonored, on the other hand, isn't a flawless masterpiece of coding, but it's entirely competent. There's no major bugs that pull you out of the immersion, and the frame rate is consistent, which is all I really ask for in a game. There is sometimes an issue where I swear it feels like the guards are seeing me through walls, and that gets frustrating and leads to a lot of save scumming, but I'm open to the possibility that like they see us through reflections or I'm not as well concealed as I thought I was. This one goes to Dishonored for doing the bare minimum I expect of a AAA title. I try not to set the bar too high on this stuff, and as long as you don't have anything glaringly wrong with your game, we're good. However, I still get the feeling that Eidos massively rushed rushed Thief 2014 when they realized they were behind after reworkings. Based on the overall quality of the games and my arbitrary head-to-head I did here, Dishonored wins out over Thief 2014. Dishonored was the one to get multiple sequels, where Thief was swept under the rug after Eidos noticed that it hadn't sold 1 billion copies and they got all gun-shy. Their loss. All Thief 2014 really needed to possibly be a better game that would contend with Dishonored would be that if we're given a few more months for QA testing and bug squashing, along with maybe rethinking that hub world a bit, or at least making you spend less time in it. At least make it to where we can use the rooftops outside of contextual situations to make it easier to get around if we don't feel like doing side quests. Between the two, I'm going to recommend Dishonored way over Thief 2014. It's a lot cheaper than Thief, which is still sitting at $40 after over 5 years, and despite Thief being the lesser of the two. Dishonored tends to go on sale a lot too. Maybe, just maybe, if Thief 2014 goes on some sort of really intense sale for like $5, I'd suggest picking it up, but otherwise, it's not worth the active price. I've included a link to the Humble store where you can pick up Dishonored and have it activate on the storefront of your choice. Buying Dishonored through Humble not only supports this channel, but it also supports charity to boot. That'll do it for today. Be sure to leave a comment about which of these games you prefer and why, and leave a like to help out the video. If you'd like to help support this channel, you can subscribe, and I also run a Patreon to help cover the costs of making videos. Just as a heads up, I'm not going to be super active until it's time for the Halloween video, as I'm taking a couple classes at my junior college to help finish up on my transferable credits before going to an upper division to finish undergrad. I gotta be as cost efficient as possible with this schooling and my bachelor if I'm ever gonna make it to law school. I've got some big plans for later in the year though, so stay tuned for October, November, and December. In the meantime, enjoy the cat video. Excuse you? What are you doing? Rummaging through my backpack and knocking over my shoes. Well, I've caught you in the act. Don't look at Mommy, she's just enjoying her crackers. What are you trying to steal from my backpack? Oh. Well, I already wrote in all of that. I'm just using it for a reference. You can read it if you want. Okay, Kat, I'm worried you're gonna get stuck in there. So, you know what I'm gonna do? We're gonna take this. That's right, get your paws out of it. And we're just gonna zip this up. And I know you like rubbing yourself across the back part. So there you go. You good? Oh yes, you are very good.